Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 258. The Heiress. The title of this episode indicates this story is about royalty, but it couldn't be further from the truth. On Charlotte Gibson's Victorian jail record, it states she was born in 1883 in India and she was a governess. Her children's state care records say that she was born illegitimate. However, public family trees state she was born Lilian Grace Dorothy Gibson in 1886 in India to James and Julia Gibson. She had an older brother, James, and two younger siblings, Julia and Roland, in the 1891 English census. Dorothy's father was 14 years older than her mother. In the 1901 English census, three other children had been born: Ellen, Elizabeth, and Isabella. Her father was working as a bookkeeper in the London suburb of Plumstead. Lilian used a number of aliases throughout her life: Charlotte Gibson, Grace Gibson Herbert, Charlotte Grace Tyrer, Lilian Grace Tyrer, Lilian Grace Hughes, and the Heiress. The first that I see of her in the Australian papers is on the 22nd of December 1904, and it says the daughter of Miss Peter Tyrer, formerly of the Victorian Railways, Melbourne. Miss Tyrer has quite recently come into a large fortune bequeathed by her father. She's an only child and when quite young, travelled nearly all over the world with her parents. She was partly educated in England, but passed matriculation from the University High School. In the will written by Peter Tyrer, his probate was passed over to his wife, in which he left £364. So how do Peter and Agnes Tyrer fit into the picture? Well, in the Melbourne Argus, it announces the marriage of Peter Tyrer and Anne Maria Jones. On the 23rd of November 1861, it says, on the 14th, Mr. Peter Tyrer, eldest son of the late Mr. W. Tyrer, contractor of Dalton, Lancashire, England, to Anne Maria, eldest daughter of Mr. G. T. Jones of Greenwich in Kent, England. They'd married in Melbourne. On the 6th of March 1905 in the Melbourne Argus, the picture becomes clearer. The alleged heiress arrested at Brighton. On Saturday afternoon, Sergeant Sheehan and Constable Kane of Brighton arrested Mrs. Anne Maria Tyrer, aged 70, and Miss Charlotte Gibson Tyrer, aged 20. The charge was having passed a valueless cheque on Miss O'Brien, the proprietress of a boarding house in Park Street, Brighton. It stated that the accused tendered a cheque for £4 10 shillings to Miss O'Brien and received £4 10 shillings in change. The cheque was presented at the Bank of New South Wales and was returned marked signature unrecognisable. The younger of the two women, Charlotte Gibson Tyrer, is the heiress who made herself known to several tradespeople in the suburbs during the past month or two. The history of Mrs. Tyrer and Charlotte Tyrer has been an interesting one since last December. The elder woman is the widow of Mr. Peter Tyrer, formerly of the locomotive branch of the railway department and the inventor of a spark arrestor. The younger woman has for some years lived with the elder as an adopted daughter, for although she has borne the name of Charlotte Gibson Tyrer, her actual name is believed to be Charlotte Gibson. For a long time, the mother and adopted daughter lived in Sutherland Road, Armidale, where Charlotte Tyrer kept a small kindergarten school, which meagrely maintained her and the elder woman. It was understood among their acquaintances that there were expectations from the inventions of the late Peter Tyrer, and in last December a definite announcement was made that the girl had come into a large fortune. The amount of the fortune was stated to be a lump sum of £20,000 and £1,500 a year in royalties from Peter Tyrer's inventions, which had been patented far and wide. The managers of a newspaper were interviewed, and in the issue of their paper there appeared a photograph of Miss Tyrer, the daughter of the late Peter Tyrer, Esquire, who'd just come into a large fortune. The photograph showed a good-looking girl of about 20 years of age, petite in stature and dark in complexion, very handsomely gowned and gracefully posed.
In addition to the charge made against the accused at Brighton, the police are investigating other cases in which the cheques given by Charlotte Tyrer have proved to be valueless. And on the 11th of March 1905 in the Brighton Southern Cross, a bogus heiress. At the Brighton court yesterday, Mrs. A.M. Tyrer, 72 years of age, and her daughter, Miss C.G. Tyrer, 22 years of age, were charged with having in company obtained money by means of false pretences. Mr. Doria appeared for the accused and said that his clients would plead guilty of the charge if the bench would deal with them. Inspector Beck consented, and the charge was amended to passing a valueless cheque with a view to obtain money. The mother, who looked careworn and anxious, was accommodated with a chair. The daughter, who stood beside her, was quietly but fashionably dressed and looked calm and collected. She is of ladylike appearance, with clear skin, large lustrous eyes, and a sweet, innocent expression that to a large extent accounts for the unlimited credit and goods that she got from the numerous tradespeople whom she victimised. There was great interest taken in the case. When the charge was read, Miss Tyrer pleaded guilty, but the mother made no sign, as she is deaf. "Mother," said the daughter, "you're guilty." "Yes," replied the mother. After Inspector Beck had outlined the case, Rose O'Brien, proprietress of a boarding house in Park Street, Brighton, said, "The two women came to my house on the 23rd of February and engaged a double room, giving the names of Mrs. and Miss Jones. They represented they had a property at Randwick and were getting £10,000 from each state for the patent rights of a spark arrestor, and altogether by the end of the month they would have £25,000. They said they had vehicles which they kept at the livery at various suburbs, and the Premier and Mr. Graves were managing their affairs. On Wednesday, the 1st of March, Miss Tyrer asked me to cash a cheque for £4 10 on the Bank of New South Wales. I cashed it in South Yarra and gave Miss Tyrer £4 10 in gold. The cheque was returned on the Friday, signature unlike, and after a conversation with Miss Jones, she admitted that her name was Tyrer. She said they have plenty of money and would make the cheque right. She said she got the cheque from a friend. When I pointed out the cheque was signed Tyrer, she said her mother's name was Jones, but she signed cheques under Tyrer. Eventually I told her if the cheque was not made good by the next morning, I would place it in the hands of the police. I saw the mother and she said she knew nothing about it. I received £3 from Miss Tyrer for the rent due. As the cheque was not made good, I sent for the police." E.B. Sennett, ledger keeper at the Bank of New South Wales, said Mrs. Tyrer had an account with the bank. In December last, when the annual charge of 5p for keeping the accounts was made, the account was 3p overdrawn. The cheque was presented and returned as the signature was unlike. Constable Kane stated that he went to Miss O'Brien's house on the Saturday and met Sergeant Skean there. "I saw Miss Tyrer and accused her of passing a valueless cheque. She said the money they expected had not been paid in, and Mr. Bent had probably forgotten to pay the £10,000 for the spark arrestor. The witness said, 'Well, if I ring up Mr. Bent, will he corroborate you?' Miss Tyrer said, 'No, he does not know me in the matter. He only knows my agents, Mr. Belton and Mr. Doria, the solicitor.' She afterwards said there was no money in the bank, also that she'd passed under the names of Gibson and Jones. She gave her last address at St. George's Hotel in St Kilda and said she had property in Randwick. She eventually admitted that she'd been telling untruths and that she got into trouble 6 months ago and since then had become more involved." In pleading for clemency, the solicitor for the defence said the elder of the accused was deaf and absolutely destitute. She believed in the merit of the spark arrestor so implicitly that he believed it had slightly affected her, till she came to believe that they were going to get a large sum of money for it. She had been a week in jail and was completely broken down. As to the younger, she was the only living relative of the old lady, and if she were punished, he would not know what the mother would do. Inspector Beck said the younger woman is the prime mover. The chairman asked, "Is the elder in full possession of her senses? She doesn't look like it." After deliberation, Mrs. Tyrer would be sentenced to 6 days' imprisonment to date from the day of her arrest, but on further consideration, the sentence was altered to one of 6 hours' imprisonment. After hearing the plea for leniency and a suggestion that, as a first offender, the youngest sentence should be suspended for any term the bench thought fit, Miss Tyrer was sentenced to 3 months' imprisonment. "It was a bad case of imposition, and the public must be protected," was the comment of the chairman. The younger woman kept her feelings under control during the hearing of the case, but broke down when her mother's sentence was announced. Miss Tyrer has been lodged at Coburg, and friends have taken charge of Mrs. Tyrer. On the 1st of June 1906 in the Melbourne Age, Miss Tyrer, the heiress, again in trouble. The complaint of Mrs. J. O'Keefe of the La Mascotte Hotel, Castlemaine, said she'd been robbed between the 20th and 25th of a 5-stone diamond ring, a silk blouse and a photograph valued at £5 10 led to a renewal of an acquaintanceship commenced some 12 months ago between the detectives and an interesting young woman who posed as an heiress with very expensive tastes in the way of costumes and drapers' wares, and whose livery bills are now being liquidated by civil process. A Miss Grace Gibson Herbert had been in Mrs. O'Keefe's employment, and she gave up her situation and left the town. She'd represented herself as an heiress who was coming into a very large fortune. When she left Castlemaine, it was supposed to be because she was claiming her money. But when the ring and the other articles were missed, she was suspected of having claimed that of somebody else, and information was lodged. Subsequently, other shortages were noticed and a warrant for Miss Herbert's arrest was issued. The diamond ring was traced to a pawn shop in Elizabeth Street, Melbourne, and Miss Herbert was traced to a house at Carlton where she told the heiress tale and from whence property had gone missing during her stay. Here the detectives had the case in hand and learnt sufficient to warrant them in coming to the conclusion that Miss Herbert would most likely prove to be Miss Charlotte Gibson Tyrer, the well-known heiress, but whose real name is Charlotte Gibson, and when they arrested her at a city hotel where she was employed as a maid, a glance at her assured them that this was such the case, and the fair prisoner, for Miss Gibson is a young woman of attractive appearance, readily admitted it. She was then locked up on a charge of larceny. The Tyrer drapery frauds of a year ago will be well remembered. The prisoner, posing as Miss Tyrer, the daughter of a deceased patentee of a spark arrestor, which was to bring her in a big royalty income from the government, ran up tremendous bills at prominent drapery stores. She and her mother were both tried for fraud, and the girl received a sentence of imprisonment, and her mother, a feeble old woman who really had no share in the scheme, was committed to the benevolent asylum where she now is. And the next day, Grace Gibson, better known as the heiress, was before the City Court to answer 2 charges of larceny from a dwelling. Her appearance attracted an unusual crowd to the court. She'd stolen a gold ring, a photo and a blouse belonging to Mrs. Michael O'Keefe, the wife of the licensee of the La Mascotte Hotel in Castlemaine, as well as a quantity of cigars and cigarettes belonging to Michael O'Keefe. An application to remand the accused to Castlemaine was granted, bail being fixed in one surety of £10 on each charge, and the accused subsequently left the court in charge of Mrs. Glover of the Salvation Army. 5 days later, she fronted Castlemaine Police Court and admitted the 3 charges. An appeal that the accused be discharged on entering into a bond for her good behaviour was made to the bench, but received no consideration. Mr. Goldsmith said that the accused was an impostor and a thief of a dangerous type, and was sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment on 2 of the charges and to 4 months' imprisonment on the 3rd, the first 2 sentences to be concurrent. And then on the 20th of June 1906, the heiress again, Charlotte Tyrer, a young woman well known as the heiress, has again figured in police courts. She was before the Carlton bench today to answer a charge of stealing from the dwelling of Sonata Richards a bodice, a dressing gown and other articles of clothing worth £2. Evidence was given to show that last month the accused came to board at the house of Miss Richards's mother. While she was there, she was shown some of the stolen articles. The articles were subsequently missed and traced to a pawn shop in Fitzroy. The charge was, at the request of the accused counsel, reduced to one of simple larceny, and the accused was fined 40 shillings in default of distress, 6 weeks imprisonment. So she was jailed under the name Grace Herbert, and she was released on the 7th of November 1906. 4 months later, on the 13th of February 1907, in the Melbourne Age, Charlotte Gibson Tyrer, who figured so conspicuously as an heiress and victimised a city firm by her representation some time ago, has since gained notoriety for her behaviour and was brought before the Fitzroy Court yesterday, charged with stealing from a dwelling. Sarah Paulson, a widow living at 27 Napier Street, gave evidence that the accused took a room from her on the 26th of December at 4 shillings a week. On the 3rd or 4th of January, the witness missed a quilt and a sheet. On that day, the accused left her house. The value of the articles was 18 shillings. Subsequently, the witness received a letter from the accused promising to return the things. Constable Bell stated that he arrested the accused on the 4th and she admitted to have taken and pawned the things. The accused said to the bench, "I cannot get a show. I have tried to do honestly and earn my own living, but wherever I go, I soon became known and then it's all up with me. I have to move on and try again. It is very hard. Unless I can get out of this state, it seems a hopeless case for me to do any good for myself. She was sentenced to a month's imprisonment. And a week later, in the Melbourne Herald, appears in court again. In the City Court today, Charlotte Tyrer, the young woman who is known as the Heiress, was charged with stealing 2 coats, 2 blouses and other articles valued at £2 and 18 shillings. The accused was before the court a few days ago. Mr. Panton, the magistrate, reserved his decision until today, as the accused had to appear on a charge of larceny at the Fitzroy Court. She was neatly clad in a dress of dark green light material and had a white straw hat and a long veil. She was calm and self-possessed while in court. Constable Bell stated that the accused was now serving a sentence of 1 month's imprisonment ordered by the Fitzroy bench on a charge of stealing a counterpane and other articles, the property of Mrs. Paulson of Fitzroy. In the present case, the stolen articles belonged to Mrs. Mary Orr of Spencer Street, and a portion of them had been recovered. The accused asked if she were to be imprisoned, the sentence might be made concurrent with the term she was at present serving. Mr. Panton said, "Very well, we will make it so." The accused was then sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment to be served concurrently with the sentence she's presently undergoing. Lilian then had a child in December 1907 who went under the care of her adopted mother Anne Tyrer in March 1909. On the 26th of February 1909, in the Echuca River in Herald, Charlotte Gibson Tyrer, 25 years of age, popularly known on account of a rather sensational case some years ago as the Brighton Heiress, was locked up at the South Melbourne Police Court on Wednesday by detectives. She's charged with having, on the 13th of February, obtained from John Arup of St Kilda the sum of £1 3 shillings and 6 and a pair of boots, valued at 12 shillings 6 by means of a valueless cheque. A similar charge is laid against her in respect of £2 11 shillings and 6, alleged to have been obtained by her from Sydney Harbour. As a result of passing those valueless cheques on the 9th of March 1909, she was jailed for imposition for 1 month on one count and 1 month on another concurrent. In the Police Gazette, it outlined that she was tried in St Kilda on the 9th of March on the 2 charges of imposition, native of India, teacher, born 1883, 5 foot 2 inches, fresh complexion, brown hair and blue eyes with 2 previous convictions. On the 13th of March 1909 in the Paran Telegraph, the Brighton Heiress. Lilian Grace Hughes, alias Charlotte Gibson Tyrer, otherwise known as the Brighton Heiress, was presented on remand on 2 charges of having obtained money by false pretences. The accused, who was not well dressed, looked indisposed. Mr. Nolan addressed the bench and said the accused was identical with a person who was convicted of several charges 2 years ago, the cases being of similar nature to the present ones. When the accused came out of jail, she determined to lead a new life and started a boarding house. She formed a friendship with one of the boarders, intimacy followed and a child was born. The relations continued with the result that the accused was now again about to become a mother. In the meantime, however, the boarder vanished and the support that he used to give the accused ceased. In these circumstances, she was induced by poverty to resort to her old practices of imposing on people. Mr. Nolan could only plead the young woman's poverty in mitigation of her crime, but not as an excuse. The bench said this was a very difficult case to deal with. They would like to know when the accused expected to become a mother, as they wished to avoid the child being born in jail. Mr. Nolan said the event would take place in about a month. The accused was then sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment on each charge, sentences being concurrent. Upon the sentence being announced, the accused wept freely, but soon became composed. 4 months later, on the 3rd of July 1909, in the Paran Telegraph, the young lady known as the Brighton Heiress, and whose name has been variously given as Frances Gibson, Charlotte Gibson Tyrer and Lilian Grace Hughes, was a defendant in a case at the St Kilda Court on Tuesday, in which she was called on to show cause why an order should not be made against her for the maintenance of her illegitimate son, Francis Gibson. Mr. Ridgway appeared for the defendant and said the object of the prosecution was to obtain the name of the father and to show that the woman had no means of supporting the child. Then the police could take other action. The father, whose name he desired to withhold, except to the bench, had called on him and asked him to write to the department offering a sum of money for the maintenance of the child. That had been done, but the department had not replied. The man was married and had 5 children, and had been for years in his present situation. The defendant, who gave her name as Lilian Grace Gibson, said she had no means. She earned from 5 shillings to 10 shillings a week as a domestic servant and maintained an older child at home. Sergeant Crowe said in the circumstances he would withdraw the charge. The chairman said, "Is there any way in which the bench could be of assistance to the woman?" Mr. Ridgway said the career of the unfortunate girl was well known. She, however, was doing her best now to get on and was not in want. She was in good hands. No doubt if she were in need at any time, she would remember the bench's kind offer. The case was then withdrawn. So a little on Frances. Frances was born on the 27th of March 1909 in Coburg. She was admitted on the 30th of March 1909 into state care due to Lilian having no means to support her. Her ward of state papers state her father was Charles William Randall. Frances initially was in the girls' depot and then was placed with Rose Elliott in Collingwood at 4 days old. On the 2nd of July 1923, she went into service with Mrs. Greenwood in Footscray. She was discharged from state care on the 13th of March 1928 to be married to John James Mackenzie, who was working on the Hume Weir. She married under the name Frances Gibson Elliott. Frances and John had 3 children: Frances June in June 1929 in Albury, Ian George in May 1934 in Bairnsdale, and a daughter who married Edwin Skage in 1960 in Bairnsdale. Frances died aged only 37 on the 3rd of May 1946 in Heidelberg, Victoria. The order that was made against Charles Randall resulted in him leaving his family, and he went to New South Wales with Lilian. But clearly Lilian did not collect their daughter once they'd made the decision to go to New South Wales. On the 18th of November 1915, Anne Maria Tyrer passed away at the Alfred Hospital. It stated that she was the relict of the late Peter Tyrer of Tyrer's Patent Spark Arrester, formerly of King Street, West Melbourne, and eldest daughter of the late G.T. Jones of Greenwich, Kent, England. So no mention of her adopted daughter in the death notice. And I can't find anything more on Lilian until her death, which was recorded on the 18th of October 1954 in Footscray, Victoria, at the age of 70.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.